10-year-old shoots his mother over a video game, it shocked a nation. For those of us who understand nervous system dysregulation, the clues were there. I'm Dr. Roseann, and we're breaking down what happens with extreme dysregulation and when it goes unchecked, and what we can do about it to prevent tragedies that continue to happen like this on a daily basis in America and across the globe. But first, I just want to give a disclaimer. I don't know this family. I don't know this kid. I have no direct knowledge about their situation. I'm not blaming or diagnosing anyone. This case is being used to illustrate how profound emotional and behavioral dysregulation can lead to tragic outcomes when missed, misunderstood, and not supported. So let's talk about what we know through the media about this 2022 Milwaukee case. So, this was a case of a 10-year-old who shot his mother after she refused to buy a VR headset. He was sent to jail. We'll talk a little bit about some of those pieces, but I want to talk about at least what we know through the media because the parents, the father, relatives did talk about some of the signs that they were seeing in advance. And that's the whole point of this video. Again, not to blame or shame anybody, but I know as somebody who takes very complex cases, I certainly know that aggression, violence, and kids that lack emotions and understanding of emotions, they're here. They happen. I also want to help reassure parents that, there are times when kids are aggressive or say aggressive things, and it doesn't mean this isn't going to be the outcome. This is an extreme case. So, I want to dissect it so that we can prevent these things from happening because they're just happening way too much. As one of the 9 approved providers for the Sandy Hook tragedy, I know firsthand how traumatizing, how awful all of these things can be. And, these kinds of situations happen every day. So the family had previously expressed that they had concerns about the kid's behavior. They were afraid of him and that he had rage issues throughout his life. He had previously set a fire in the home. He had killed and tortured animals. Most importantly, he had little remorse for any of his actions, right? Kids may appear to not have remorse, but usually when you get in there, it's just that they're so afraid and they're so angry. But we have a repeated pattern of that. We've got to be concerned. And sometime before the shooting, there was an unspecified diagnosis from a therapist. It was called in the media concerning diagnosis that led to the family actually installing video cameras to watch him. His mother could no longer talk about his behavior to the relatives, or she couldn't get any babysitters. Due to privacy, because this is technically mental health, we have no information about any kind of what treatment he received privately, school, through agencies, or what he didn't receive. So we have no information about that. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about are just things that are best practices. Now, he was charged as an adult in this crime, which then raises its own legal and ethical issues. Certainly, it was awful what he did, but 10-year-olds don't really have a full concept yet of what it is to harm another people, the sense of, here's my outcomes of my actions, whether it's harming themselves or harming others. Their brain isn't developed yet developmentally to really fully understand that. If you're thinking, how does a 10-year-old even get to that point? Let's talk about the signs that were likely there long before this tragedy, right? We already heard that he was aggressive, full of rage. We don't know what that look like on the daily basis. When you're looking at your extreme levels of dysregulation, we're talking explosive outbursts, aggression, and things that are occurring at a high frequency with intensity and very poor recovery after for a long period of time. Those are extreme forms of emotional dysregulation. They don't always lead to harming others or harming themselves, but they could definitely be somebody who, is damaging property or getting in trouble all the time or not keeping them hands to themselves. That in this culture is going to cause legal problems, it's going to cause friendship problems, and nobody feels good about any of that stuff. Extreme dysregulation can show violence towards humans and pets. We always want to be extremely, extremely concerned. And there is never a time when your child shows those levels of dysregulation where you're not getting help. That is just one of the worst things that you can do. Your kid's not going to outgrow that. You'll see an inability to calm down. This might be somebody that has what I call that hair trigger, and then they react and they can't calm down. Always these kinds of kids show poor frustration tolerance at an early age. Whenever I've had kids with extreme dysregulation, unless they've had an acquired injury, always in their history, I'll hear, just right from infancy, difficulty regulating from nursing to the bathroom, big reactions when things didn't go their way. These kinds of individuals, kids show extreme rigidity, black and white thinking, which is why there's a lot of discord between parent and child, because it's one way or another. And as kids are developing, as you know, right, they start seeing the gray. So when you have a kid who's really not what we call perspective taking, we really want to think, what's driving that? Is this somebody who's on the autistic spectrum that has a hard time perspective taking? Is this somebody who really has such extreme emotional distress that their nervous system is always in a sympathetic dominant state, right? Fight, flight, or freeze or fawn, and they can't come down enough to see it? You've got to really dig in there and you're going to need professional help. This is where we see dangerous impulsivity, very aggressive kind of behaviors, maybe harm towards siblings, animals. I had a kid one time, he just walked out, kindergarten, walked out of the school and went home. I was in shock that he even knew where he was. It was a neighborhood school, but had a lot of aggression, right? We see a lot of anxiety in this child. Anxiety can trigger aggression, aggressive talk. It doesn't mean, again, that it's going to lead to other things. You will see sleep disturbances, overall, family walking on eggshells not to have this kid set off, and then no remorse or awareness of their behavior. Like, you'll almost in disbelief of the child's behaviors, teenagers' behaviors, and their lack of connection to it, which again creates a lot of discord. What could they have done differently? Now, again, we don't know what this parent did, but let's just say we have a really aggressive kid who's showing a lack of insight into their behavior, right? What can you do? So, for number one, the behavior is a cry for help. This is not, a motivation issue. This isn't somebody who's being disrespectful on purpose. They're dysregulated. And so we can't ignore those behaviors. They're not going to outgrow them. These are extreme behaviors. You need help. So seeking early intervention is critical. You want to find somebody who works with behaviorally dysregulated kids, ask your physician, ask your friends, do a Google search. A lot of practitioners don't work with very dysregulated kids. Younger kids often have the benefit of play therapy, but you really want to find somebody. Number two, the next part of getting early intervention is, having worked with kids with reactive attachment disorder, trauma, birth trauma, all types of extreme things that could produce some of these behaviors. Neurofeedback is designed to directly regulate the nervous system. I can't implore you enough in how effective it can be. And there are providers everywhere. And the quicker you do it, the easier it is to regulate. You still need to have direct psychotherapy to teach these skills and to support you as a parent and helping that child, because you've got to co-regulate and you've got to model calm. And I know how hard that is when you have an extremely dysregulated kid. It is hard. That means you are actively working multiple times a day to get your nervous system regulated. And you have to do this 10x more than you think because your child is having difficulty absorbing the information that you're trying to teach them, that maybe the teacher's trying to teach them, and they're not making connection between their behavior and the outcomes. And this is part of this fuel to the fire of this aggression because they have irrational thoughts, irritations, all these different components. We want to make sure that we're advocating for school supports and other supports to help your child and to reduce environmental stressors. That does not mean you walk on eggshells and avoid it, but think about sensory supports, reducing, trying to get your kid to 14 sports because you think that's going to help them. What can you do in their environment that's going to help reduce the stress? Do you have a calm corner? Are you always in a punishment cycle? It's just not going to help. Punishment is not going to fix this. What is going to help is that co regulation, right? And in terms of providers, we always want to screen for extreme dysregulation, but beyond than what's typical, right? And I find that when I'm always, gosh, I'm typically the 12th or beyond provider, even for young children. And people come to me from all over the world. If you want to work with me, you can go to www.drroseann.com/help. And that's our solution matcher. And there's all kinds of solutions. When people come to me and I'm able to always see what goes wrong in these extreme cases, right? Have that vantage point of connecting the dots because I'm looking backwards. I've been on both sides of the table. And so I'm always thinking of what that end result is, right? That's why we regulate first, brain behavior reset, regulate first, and then teach the skills without regulating a child's nervous system, especially when you have some extreme dysregulation. You're not going to get the learning in, right? So, what happened in this case, from the little we know, is that they were afraid of him, clearly was in a rage cycle all the time, and they were so fearful of him, they put cameras up. Now, we don't have no idea what happened in between, and I also really wanna say that it is very hard to get proper care. In the greatest country in the world, America, it is incredibly hard, and the number one place people try to get mental health care is actually hospitals and through the police. That 50% of police calls are mental health calls. And that's because these behaviors blow up and parents have no idea what to do. Providers don't, mental health providers won't always work with extreme cases of behavior, especially when we have teenagers. They're afraid of the liability and you get pushed to meds. And meds may or may not be the answer, but you need a different way to respond, and meds aren't going to correct the behavior. As a provider, you really want to screen and figure out what's the impact. What is really going on? Do you have some of these behaviors, this extreme behavior? And I always provide trauma informed care when I have extreme behaviors like this, because even if trauma wasn't the source, everybody's traumatized, right? And you want to make sure you're connecting families to resources beyond what you're doing. So if you're a school provider or a medical provider or whatever it is, even as a therapist, this is very overwhelming. And providing parents with training in our nervous system regulation tools for themselves, for their child, what can they do to help calm things down? Because if we're just ramping up, everybody's going to be in a dysregulated state. Co-regulation isn't going to be possible. So critical for both the child and parent, right? So why could his behavior, been so extreme, right? So number one, didn't get intervention, right? We don't know if that's true or not. He may have not gotten proper intervention and certainly nervous system support, right? I don't believe this is a case that had nervous system support because hopefully we wouldn't have had extreme behaviors like this. Other sources, right, could be birth trauma, early developmental trauma, could be head injury of any kind. I get very young kids who have head injuries, the parents never connect to the extremes in behaviors. And you can see everything from depression to out of control behaviors like this. He could have had an undiagnosed or a diagnosed clinical issue where there was an impulse control issue, could potentially have been on the autism spectrum. And please know, I don't think the majority of children and individuals with autism don't show these kinds of behaviors, even though we know that the Sandy Hook tragedy, the shooter did have autism. There were so many layers in that case. This is somebody that at the point was anorexic and had stopped eating. So you are not getting nutrients. You're just not working normally. And plus, we don't even know if that was a right diagnosis, right? So there could be paranoia, there can be all kinds of things. You can have brain inflammation that could lead to extreme behaviors, and then compounding factors like device dysregulation where he or she is on a device all the time and it's just fueling the fire. So when they're not on their device, they're in a rage, right? Because they're not getting the dopamine hit. And we don't know what happened at home. We don't know in situations where other individuals are dysregulated or traumatized and living in that way, the dysregulation fuels the dysregulation. We don't have co regulation, nobody's modeling that. These are all things that happen. This is violence, and dysregulation feeds dysregulation and violence. So, again, no excuses. This is just trying to understand how these behaviors can happen, and I know how scary it is to have an aggressive child, have a child who seems out of control. The best thing we can do is get help from a licensed, qualified professional and really start working on regulating that nervous system. If you're hearing this and you're thinking, my child struggles with some of these behaviors, keep listening because you're not powerless, and those early interventions, those therapies really make a difference. So what are the top takeaways here? Early intervention prevents escalation of behaviors. Okay, a higher level of care is needed with extreme behaviors, right? And that could mean much more intensive therapies. It can mean at home therapies. It could mean residential. It can mean a lot of things. But when you're that afraid that you had to have video cameras, you need a higher level of cares. You need clinical tools to calm the nervous system. Neurofeedback, PEMF, biofeedback. These are tools that are clinically proven to regulate. That child or any individual with those extreme behaviors needed more support. And you have to understand that dysregulation, you got to see it as overwhelm and intervene, right? So, okay, this is somebody who, your child is reacting all the time. It's upsetting. It's hard, right? And as I always say, you signed up to have this kid. So we've got to do what we can and use the science to regulate first and then come in. And daily nervous system resets for you, your child, everybody is required when you have an extremely dysregulated individual living in your home. Maybe you're listening to this and thinking, wow, this is, somebody else in my home, because I know parents that do that. So, and really understand that you got to regulate. So, I know this is an extreme case, but sometimes we need to see the extreme to better understand what we need to do when your child just has 5% of these behaviors. Because when you use these tools and methods with extreme cases, which, I started out working in, residential treatment centers, and I saw what worked and didn't. And that's part of why I went down this road of looking at science-backed solutions and regulating the nervous system. So when you see these extremes and you say, okay, I've got early stages, don't wait. If you suspect emotional dysregulation, you're going to start with that free solution matcher. Go to drroseann.com/help and get the solutions that can guide you in the right place. But remember, it's always going to be okay only when we take action. So if you're observing and frozen, maybe you need to put your own oxygen mask on first. But these extremes don't just happen. There are a lot of warning signs along the way. Regulate first, because when you calm, everything else follows.